Garrett Jensen didn't have time to breathe, let alone fix another broken elevator in Midtown. But when dispatch called and said it was a high-rise emergency, he glanced at the clock, only 10 minutes left on his shift, and sighed. "Tell Em I'm on my way," he muttered, grabbing his toolbox and heading for the service van parked outside the elementary school where he'd just dropped off his daughter, Ava. At 8 years old, Ava was the center of his entire life. Her backpack was almost as big as she was, and she'd waved at him with that lopsided grin that always made the exhaustion worth it. He hadn't told her he'd picked up extra jobs this week. She didn't need to know that her school tuition was late again or that he was behind on rent. Being a single dad wasn't the hard part, doing it while trying to keep the lights on was. He pulled up to the towering glass building on 5th Avenue and exhaled when he saw the name, Wexley International. Big money. Even the security desk looked too clean to touch. He nodded at the receptionist and took the service elevator to the 32nd floor, toolbox in hand. "The elevator's stuck on 33, the building manager said, jogging up. "We've got someone inside. She's been in there over 20 minutes. "Anyone should be worried about?" Garrett asked, kneeling to pry open the panel. The manager hesitated. "Yeah, Emerson Wexley, the CEO. Garrett froze. "You're kidding." "Nope," the guy leaned in. "Just don't say anything dumb, all right." Garrett grunted. He didn't have time to worry about offending some uptight executive. He just wanted to get her out and get home before Ava's aftercare closed. He popped the panel open and worked the manual override. The gears groaned, and the elevator inched its way down until it stopped with a jolt. The doors creaked open halfway, revealing a woman inside sitting on the floor in her heels and navy pencil skirt, her blazer folded beneath her like a cushion. Her phone battery was dead, and she looked up warily as the light from the hallway poured in. "You all right?" Garrett asked, stepping into the cab carefully. She stared for a second. "You're not security." "Nope, I'm the guy who just rescued you." He gave her a tired grin and offered a hand. She took it, her fingers smooth and cool against his calloused palm. "Thanks," she said, brushing herself off as she stood. "I was about 5 minutes away from screaming." "That would have made the job easier," he joked. She laughed, actually laughed, and he blinked. She was beautiful. Not just in a polished, expensive kind of way, but something about her eyes sharp, but tired, and the way she'd rolled up her sleeves made her seem real. "Garrett," he said, clearing his throat. "Jensen." "Emerson Wexley," she replied, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "As in, yes, I own the building." He raised a brow. "So, not just some woman trapped in an elevator." "Depends on how you look at it." There was a pause, not awkward, but charged. Then Garrett blinked and stepped back. "All right, you're free. I'll go ahead and finish up with the panel." She tilted her head. "Do you always fix things alone?" "I'm a single dad," he said before he could stop himself. "So, yeah, pretty much everything I do is alone." She didn't flinch or give him that pitying look most people did. Instead, she nodded slowly. "That sounds hard." "It's worth it," he said, tightening a bolt. "My daughter's amazing." Her eyes softened. "What's her name?" "Ava, she's in 3rd grade. Loves science, hates broccoli." Emerson smiled, really smiled. "Smart girl." Garrett stood and shut the panel. "There, all good." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a card?" He blinked. "Why?" "I want to hire you for my building's maintenance contract. Ours is expiring, and I like the way you work." He stared at her. "You don't even know me." "I know you showed up, stayed calm, and fixed a problem. That's more than I can say for most people, pay 6 figures." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not some big company." "Good, I'm not looking for big. I'm looking for someone who gives a damn." He didn't know what to say, so he just handed her a bent business card from his back pocket. "It's got my number. Not that it matters much. I don't usually get clients who wear heels worth more than my rent. She laughed again. You'd be surprised what I wear when I'm off the clock. Before he could respond, her assistant came running down the hall. Ms. Wexley, we were about to call the fire department. I'm fine, Sandra. Mr. Jensen here saved me. She turned back to Garrett. I'll be in touch. She walked away, heels clicking across the marble floor, leaving Garrett staring after her like he'd just stepped into a different universe. That night, after putting Ava to bed with a story and a kiss on her forehead, Garrett sat at the kitchen table, staring at the card she'd handed back to him, this time with her handwritten number on it. He didn't think she'd actually call. But 2 days later, she did. Hey, she'd said casually. So I was thinking, do you ever go to that pizza place on 9th? I owe you lunch. He hesitated. Lunch. Come on, Garrett. I almost died in that elevator. The least I can do is buy you a slice. He looked at Ava, who was coloring at the table. I have my daughter with me. Then bring her. And just like that, they went to lunch. Emerson Wexley, CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire, sat in a booth with grease on her hands and listened to Ava talk about volcanoes and slime, and Garrett watched her laugh like she belonged in their world. The next day, she sent Ava a mini telescope with a handwritten note, to the smartest girl I've ever met. Keep looking at the stars. E. And Garrett knew, right then, that his life was about to change. Garrett adjusted the sleeves of his only clean collared shirt as he guided Ava up the granite steps of the art museum. She clutched his hand, bouncing lightly on her toes, eyes wide at the towering glass facade that shimmered in the late afternoon light. He hadn't planned on spending their Saturday in a building full of paintings, but when Emerson invited them to the private opening of a new exhibit, kid-friendly with free gelato, she'd promised he couldn't say no. Not after the way Ava's face lit up. Ava tugged at his hand. Do you think they'll have those paintings where you can't tell what it is until you squint? They better, or we're demanding double the gelato. Inside, the museum buzzed with people in tailored coats and polished shoes. Garrett immediately felt underdressed. He tugged at his collar, which scratched his neck, and subtly tried to flatten Ava's flyaway curls. She wore her favorite dress, the one with stars on it, and sneakers with scribbled rainbows. She didn't notice the stares. He did. Then Emerson appeared. Not in a blazer or pencil skirt, but in a soft ivory blouse and jeans that looked like they still cost more than his weekly paycheck. She bent to Ava's level, offering a gentle smile. You made it, and you look like a constellation, she said, touching the hem of Ava's dress. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Almost turned around when I saw the doorman look at my boots like they were a security threat. Then I'm glad you didn't, she replied, straightening. Come on, there's a sculpture garden on the roof. You can see all the way to the river. As they walked, Garrett leaned toward her. You sure they're okay with kids at this kind of thing? They'll survive, she said coolly. Besides, I made a donation. That usually buys a little tolerance. He glanced at her sideways. Must be nice. It's useful, she said. Nice is something else. They stepped onto the rooftop, where a small cluster of modern sculptures twisted toward the sky. Ava ran ahead, circling a chrome spiral that caught the sun like a prism. Garrett watched her, hands in his pockets. She's confident, Emerson said beside him. She's never been afraid to be seen, he replied. I try not to dim that. They stood in silence for a moment, the city stretching out beyond the glass rail. Where's her mom? Emerson asked quietly. Garrett didn't flinch. Left when Ava was 2, she said she wasn't built for slow mornings and toy bins. Emerson's expression didn't change, but her hands curled slightly at her sides. And you've done this alone since. Garrett nodded. I didn't really have a choice. I don't think most people could do what you've done. He looked at her, surprised by the softness in her voice. Most people don't have Ava. They watched as the little girl tilted her head, gazing at a sculpture shaped like a giant question mark. She asked me last night if stars make noise, he said. Told me she thinks they probably hum so quietly we just can't hear it. Emerson smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I used to wonder things like that. Then I was told to stop wasting time. By who? She hesitated. My father. Garrett didn't press. He could see from the way her shoulders stiffened that the topic came with weight. Instead, he changed course. Why'd you invite us here? She glanced at him. Because I wanted you to see something that wasn't broken. He blinked. What? You spend your days fixing things. I thought maybe it'd be nice to just look at something that doesn't need repairs. He didn't know how to answer that. Later, they sat on a bench while Ava licked a small cone of pistachio gelato, her legs swinging. Emerson leaned back, her gaze unfocused. I used to come here when I was a teenager, she said, before my name meant anything. I'd sit in front of this one painting, just a blue square, really, and imagine what it would feel like to live inside it. Garrett tilted his head. Why a blue square? Because it was quiet and mine. She looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw how tired she really was, not just in the way she carried herself, but in the shadows behind her eyes. Do you ever wish you could disappear? She asked. Only when my landlord calls. She huffed a laugh. That's not what I meant. I know, he said, but disappearing doesn't fix anything. You just end up alone in a different place. Her gaze lingered on him. You always talk like that. Like what? Like you've already been through the worst of it. Because I have. They didn't speak for a while after that. Ava finished her gelato and curled up beside him, resting her head on his arm. He glanced at his watch. We should probably get going. She's got a project due Monday. Emerson stood and walked them to the doors, pausing just before they exited. I'm hosting a dinner next week, just a few people. Business associates, you should come. He raised an eyebrow. Why would I? Because I want you there. He looked down at Ava, then back at her. I don't fit in your world. Maybe I'm tired of mine. He didn't answer, just gave the smallest nod and led Ava down the steps. Inside the museum, Emerson watched him disappear into the crowd, her hands clenched at her sides, her heart beating just a little faster than it should have. Garrett stood in front of the mirror inside the small, dim hallway of his apartment, trying to remember the last time he'd worn a blazer. It was slightly too snug in the shoulders and still had a dry cleaning tag pinned to the inside sleeve. He tugged it off and ran a hand through his hair, which refused to cooperate. Ava sat on the couch behind him, her tablet resting on her knees, earbuds in as she watched a space documentary for the third time this week. Mrs. Donnelly from next door would. The dinner invitation had arrived in a navy envelope with gold lettering. Elegant. He hadn't known people still sent invitations like that. Inside was the name of a restaurant he'd only ever seen on TV and a reservation under Emerson's name. Not a corporate dinner, like she'd said, just her. That part hadn't been in the envelope. She'd called him the day after the museum and said the others had backed out. The way she said it, he wasn't sure they'd ever been invited at all. He tied the laces on his cleanest shoes and kissed Ava's forehead before knocking on Mrs. Donnelly's door. She ushered Ava inside with a hug and a wave, and Garrett made his way down the stairs, nerves tightening with each step. When he arrived at the restaurant, a valet took one look at him and hesitated. Garrett handed over the keys and tried not to notice how out of place his pickup looked parked between a Rolls and a Bentley. Inside, the hostess led him through a corridor of tall glass dividers and soft ambient lighting until they reached a corner table with a view of the skyline. Emerson was already there. She wore a steel gray dress with sleeves that wrapped around her arms like liquid metal. Her hair was pinned up, exposing a thin silver necklace that rested above her collarbone. The expression she wore wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was uncertain, like she wasn't sure if he'd show. He pulled the chair back and nodded. "You clean up all right." "You're late," she said, but her voice lacked bite. "I was trying to convince my jacket to fit. It lost." She laughed not loud, but with her eyes. "I was about to text you. Then I remembered you probably don't check your phone when you're nervous." He raised an eyebrow. "Who says I'm nervous?" "You're wearing your watch on the wrong wrist." He glanced down. Huh. Their drinks arrived, sparkling water for her, coffee for him, and the waiter disappeared into the shadows. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." Garrett blinked. "You're not wasting time tonight, are you?" "Not in the mood for small talk." He hesitated, then said, "When I was 17, I wanted to be a pilot." She tilted her head. "Really?" "I used to sneak out at night and sit by the airport fence, watch the planes take off. Had this idea that if I could just get high enough, everything down here would make sense." She looked at him for a long beat. "Why didn't you do it?" "My brother got sick, stayed." She didn't ask anything else, didn't offer sympathy, just nodded like she understood the weight of choosing responsibility over desire. "Your turn," he said. "I almost got married 5 years ago. The night before the wedding, I walked out." Garrett blinked. "Wow, cold feet." "No, I realized I didn't love him. I loved the idea of not disappointing everyone." He leaned back. "That's heavy." "It was necessary." They ordered dinner. She chose the sea base. He picked the only thing on the menu he recognized: steak. Between courses, she asked about Ava's school, and Garrett told her about the science fair project Ava had started using soda bottles and duct tape. Emerson listened, resting her chin on her hand, eyes sharp but warm. After dessert, she didn't reach for the check. Instead, the waiter quietly set it down and walked away. Garrett studied her. "You always pay." "No," she said, "only when I invite someone." He didn't argue. He just nodded and stood when she did. Outside, the city pulsed around them in a blur of headlights and late-night chatter. She walked beside him to the valet stand, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. "Thanks for coming," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I almost didn't." "I know." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "This thing between us, if it even is a thing, it doesn't make sense." "I'm not asking for sense, Garrett." He looked at her. "Then what are you asking for?" She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Something real, even if it's messy." He didn't answer, not right away. Then, without thinking, he reached up and touched the necklace at her throat. "You always wear silver." She nodded. "Gold feels like armor, silver feels like skin." He let his hand drop. "You're strange." "I'm honest." The valet pulled up with his truck. The passenger side door let out a groan that made Emerson grin. "You ever think about leaving it all?" he asked suddenly. She turned to him. "Every day." "And I remember who I built it for." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you just need someone who doesn't belong in it to remind you why you started." She didn't respond, just looked at him like she was trying to memorize something before it slipped away. "Good night, Garrett," she said. He opened the door and climbed in, watching her as she turned, walked back into the city, and disappeared behind the glass doors that had never been meant for people like him. But still she'd invited him in, and that meant something. It meant everything. The knock at his door came just past 8 on a Wednesday. Garrett had just finished helping Ava with her math homework, her pencil still on the table beside a half-eaten apple. She was curled up on the couch now, dozing off to the sound of a nature documentary. He lowered the volume and stepped toward the door with quiet footsteps. When he opened it, Emerson stood in the hallway not in heels, not in silk, but in a navy hoodie and sneakers, rain clinging to her hair. Her eyes found his like she'd rehearsed it, but her voice wavered. "I need to talk to you," she said. He stepped aside without a word. She passed him, pausing when she saw Ava asleep on the couch. Something flickered across her face, something tender. Garrett grabbed a blanket from the chair and draped it over his daughter before nodding toward the kitchen. They sat at the small table, across from each other. The overhead light buzzed faintly as rain tapped against the window. Garrett waited. "I'm leaving Wexley International," she said. He blinked. "What?" "I'm stepping down, selling my shares. I met with the board this morning." He stared at her, stunned. "You've run that company for 10 years. 8, she corrected softly. "But it's not mine anymore, hasn't been for a while. It's my father's legacy, not mine." "Why now?" I couldn't breathe in there anymore. Every decision I made was weighed against the ghost of a man who never believed could run it without becoming him. She drew in a breath. "I don't want to spend the next 10 years trying to prove something to someone who's not even watching." "And what happens next?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want something different. I want something that feels like mine." Garrett leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You came here in the rain to tell me that." "I came because I need you to know that I'm not just walking away from a company. I'm walking toward something." He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he said, "You sure you're not just running?" "I've been running since I was 20. This is the first time I've stopped." He nodded once, processing. "So, what do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you." She met his eyes. "I want something with you." He exhaled, the weight of her words heavier than he expected. "You're talking like you've already decided." "I have." "You don't know what you're signing up for." "I know you're raising an incredible kid. I know your hands tell more truth than most people's resumes. I know when you look at someone, they feel seen." She paused. "And I know, haven't felt like myself in a long time until I was standing in front of your truck, watching you drive away." He looked past her, at the living room where Ava stirred slightly beneath her blanket. "She likes you," he said. "Then she's smarter than I thought." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You're not supposed to know how to say things like that." "I don't. I'm just done pretending I don't feel what I feel." He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city. "I've been in survival mode for so long, I don't know what it looks like to reach for more." "Then let me show you." He turned, watching her as she stood slowly. "What does that even look like?" "I bought a property, upstate, old observatory. It's falling apart and I don't care. I want to turn it into something new, a place for kids. Workshops, science camps, mentoring. Ava could come every summer." He stared at her, stunned. "You bought an observatory." "I bought a dream," she said. "It just happens to have a roof full of stars." He stepped closer, voice low. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person who ever looked at me without seeing a last name." His throat tightened. "You're talking about changing your whole life." "I already did. I just needed you to know it." He reached out and touched her cheek, soft, rain damp, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. "I'm terrified," he whispered. "Me too," she said. He kissed her before he could talk himself out of it, his hand slipping to her jaw like it had always belonged there. She leaned into him without hesitation, grounding him in a way no one ever had. A soft voice interrupted them. "Dad." They turned. Ava stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Hey, baby," Garrett said, crouching. "You okay?" She looked at Emerson, then back at him. "Is she gonna stay?" He glanced up at Emerson, who gave a small nod. "If you want her to," Garrett said. Ava studied her for a beat, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Emerson's waist. Garrett stood and watched as Emerson knelt and hugged her back, eyes closed, face buried in Ava's shoulder. It was the first moment he'd seen her completely unguarded. Later that week, Emerson handed over her resignation in a closed-door meeting that made headlines. Garrett didn't read the articles. He was too busy installing shelves in the observatory's broken-down lab while Ava asked questions about constellations and helped paint the walls. Months passed. The observatory transformed slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. Emerson walked the halls barefoot, clipboard in hand, her voice soft but sure as she guided volunteers and sketched out plans. Garrett built with his hands what she envisioned in her heart. On the opening day of the children's workshop, Ava stood beside Emerson in a new dress covered in galaxies, handing out programs to every family that walked in. Garrett watched them from across the room, his chest so full he couldn't breathe. When the last guest left and the sun dipped low over the tree line, Emerson pulled him outside to the roof. The sky shimmered. "Still think stars don't hum?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. He looked down at her, then up at the sky. "I think I just couldn't hear them until now." She smiled, and he kissed her there under the stars, on the roof of what used to be a ruin and now felt like home. And for the first time in his life, Garrett Jensen wasn't fixing something. He was building something new. The following spring arrived in a flurry of soft blossoms, damp soil, and the hum of something new taking root. The observatory's courtyard, once overgrown with weeds and cracked stone, had been transformed into a vibrant space with benches, climbing ivy, and a circular flower bed that Emerson insisted be planted in the shape of Saturn's rings. Garrett had rolled his eyes but built the frame anyway, secretly proud of how much she'd begun to see the world through Ava's eyes, curious, unfiltered, limitless. It was the Saturday before the first overnight astronomy camp. The air smelled of fresh paint and sun-warmed cedar, and inside one of the refurbished labs, Garrett was adjusting a telescope mount while Emerson paced with a clipboard, balancing it against her hip as she muttered schedules to herself. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," he said, tightening the last screw. "I just want everything to go right. The parents are driving up tomorrow morning. Some of them are board members from Wexley. This has to be seamless." "You left all that behind." "I did," she said, pausing, "but I still want them to see that I didn't fail. Just changed the finish line." Garrett stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," she said quietly, "but I want Ava to see what it looks like when a woman builds something on her own terms." He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She already does." "You think so?" "She told Mrs. Donnelly last week that you were the boss of the stars now." Emerson let out a breath of laughter, tension slipping from her shoulders. "That kid's going to rule the world." "She already rules mine." Her hand found his, fingers threading through without thought, like it was the most natural thing in the universe. Later that evening, after Ava had finished her checklist for camp and was tucked into the sleeping loft with a book and her glow in the dark constellation blanket, Garrett found Emerson outside by the fire pit, barefoot in the grass, her hair down and curls catching the gold of the flames. He handed her a mug of tea and sat beside her on the bench. "Do you miss it?" he asked after a minute. "The city, the structure, the way everything felt, exact." "I miss the view from my old office," she admitted. "Not the power, just the silence of being that high above everything." He nodded, gazing up at the sky. "You ever think we're too different for this to work long-term?" "No," she said simply. He looked at her. "I used to think I had to match someone's resume to fall in love with them. But then I met someone who didn't ask me for anything. I had only for who I was." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, square box. She froze. "You said once you walked away from a wedding because it wasn't your future," he said. "So I figured I'd ask if this one is." He opened the box. Inside sat a slender ring, not flashy but elegant, with a stone the color of twilight. Emerson stared at it, lips parted, eyes wider than he'd ever seen them. "I'm not promising perfection," he said, "but I'll promise every morning coffee, every late-night telescope alignment, every science fair meltdown. I'll be there." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took the ring gently and slid it onto her finger, then leaned in and kissed him slow and certain, like the answer had always been yes. "I don't need a ballroom," she whispered. "I just need you." They married the following summer in the observatory's courtyard, beneath strings of lights and an arch garret built from telescope parts and copper piping. Ava stood between them in a dress she picked herself, beaming as she officiated with the confidence only a child could carry. "I now pronounce you totally awesome," she declared, and the crowd of friends and campers and neighbors erupted in laughter and applause. Afterward, as the stars blinked awake overhead, Emerson rested her head on Garrett's chest while they danced barefoot on the grass. "This is what I never knew I wanted," she said softly. "You built it," he reminded her. "Not alone." The observatory never slowed. It grew with every season, new programs, new families, new discoveries made by tiny hands and wide eyes. Ava thrived, her curiosity fed daily by the world they'd created. She built her first working telescope by age 10 and started a stargazing journal she shared with Emerson every Sunday. Garrett taught workshops on engineering and mechanics, but always made time to build something new with her treehouses, solar panels, once even a rotating planetarium dome that became the pride of the camp. Their days were never quiet, but they were full, with laughter, with purpose, with love. One night, years later, as fireflies blinked across the fields and the observatory glowed softly on the hill, Emerson and Garrett sat on the roof, legs dangling over the edge, watching Ava point constellations out to a group of younger campers. "She's taller than me now," Emerson said, nudging his knee. "She's smarter than both of us combined. We should probably be worried." Emerson smiled, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did it," she said. "No," Garrett replied, kissing her temple. "You dreamed it. I just came along for the ride." She tilted her face toward him and kissed him, slow and warm. "You were the best part of the dream," she whispered. And beneath the stars that had once felt so far away, in a place they built from ruins and hope, they stayed together, in love, and finally home.